Let's have a introduction to the SAT evidence-based reading and writing. So you see that under the writing and language portion, it's divided up into two sections, reading and writing and language. And you see under the writing and language portion some of the skills that are addressed, words in context, command of evidence, expression of ideas, standard English conventions. I'm going to break that down. We're going to break that down more extensively here in the next few minutes, and then in subsequent videos, I'm going to go through some examples of what that looks like. So I'm going to cut myself out here because I want to focus on what's going on the slides here. So in the writing and language test, precision, concise writing, precision, context, appropriateness. Appropriateness of expression, looking at how is the expression appropriate, and using context clues to figure out how that meaning of word or phrase is being used. Decide where author's word choice. These are some of the skills you're going to get tested on. The other thing, command of evidence, retaining, adding, revising, deleting information and ideas, interpreting graphics. Occasionally you'll have to interpret graphics. These are selected response questions only. Here's the example of what they look like. There is no actual writing. There's a separate section for the writing that we'll talk about in subsequent lessons. So writing and language tests, some ask about the passage organization, its impact. For instance, you might be asked which words or structural changes improve or how well it makes its point. These are the more difficult questions. That you may want to skip and come back to show you an example of that on the test. Like this is an example of a connecting sentences ideas question. Which choice most logically follows the previous sentence? And I'm going to go through this section. If you were a senior this coming school year, if you're a senior, you took the practice test 3 last December. I know that was a while ago, but it's the one I'm going through. And then should the writer consider revising the underlying portion? How do the sentences that they want to put in or the phrases they want to put in connect to the paragraphs around it? Okay, those are more difficult and may require you to spend more time with those in terms of timing. So let's talk briefly about what we're looking at. Ready, read, respond, rhetorical. Ready, look at the questions, the underlying portion first. Okay, so here's here's some examples of that. Here's the underlying portion as it and it's going to ask you to make changes. This is number 10, and it's going to ask you which one works best. Read the sentence the underlying portion contains. If necessary, read the sentences around it for context. Okay. Respond. Try various answer choices to see which makes sense. Eliminate those that don't work. I'll go through that in a subsequent video. Rhetorical. Save these for last. Again, here's the example of the rhetorical. Sometimes they are at the end anyways. Some of the ones that are more difficult, like the yes, should the writer make this addition here? Yes, why, or no, why. So deciding yes, the writer should make that addition, and then why or no, the writer should not make this addition, and why would be important. So let's look at some of the skills. Let's take a further breakdown. I gave you a very general, high-level overview: words in context, command of evidence, expression of ideas, and again, what does those mean? So let's look at this in a little more detail. So rhetorical: strategy, organization, style, types of questions, usage mechanics, sentence structure, grammar and usage, punctuation. These are the major two types as you're breaking it down: usage mechanics, rhetorical. And then you have, so how does that look? In the usage mechanics, you have sentence structure, run-on, fragments, etc. Run-on, fragments, misplaced modifiers, parallel construction. We'll look at some examples of what those mean. Pronoun agreement, pronoun case, like making sure the subject and object agree with each other. Subject-verb agreement is a big one. Splits. So what they'll have is example of subject-verb agreement, but it won't always be right together. Again, this is a little more advanced. This is 11th grade and beyond, so this is going to be a little more advanced. Verb, tense, adjectives and adverbs and idioms or common expressions. That, believe it or not, is the easier part. And then you've got rhetorical questions such as the organization, reorganizing sentences in a paragraph. Example, what's the best placement for sentence 2? Reorganizing paragraphs. Paragraph 4 is best place where. And then you've got strategy type questions. And strategy type questions are connecting sentences and ideas. So transition words sometimes are helpful, or connecting paragraphs. How does one paragraph flow into another? This is where you have this idea of integrated transitions, and I'll on the subsequent video that I go through the practices, I'll show you an example of how that looks. No change and omit. No change is the answer. 25% of the time you'll see here that you have some no changes, and those are not just there for fun. Those are actually answers 25% of the time. If you can see the term omit in there, or take it out, does the underlying portion need to be there? And how does the paragraph relate to the rest of the paragraph? Does it need to be there? So maybe they're indicating something with conciseness. If they're asking you to omit something, they don't delete the underlying portion and end the sentence with a period. In fact, it's the answer. So sometimes they're asking you a word choice or redundancy question in that situation. If they're asking you to omit something or delete, same thing. So wordiness redundancy is a big part of this. Wordiness redundancy, repeating information which has already been stated. That's one. Word choice and tone. Some passages are popular writing using I's, using contractions. Some are more formal writing with essays and research papers, and you wouldn't use I's using contractions. The other thing I want to briefly talk about before I end this, I'm going to put myself back on the screen, is timing. So on the English portion, the writing and language test of the reading and writing section, 35 minutes, 44 questions, 4 sections, 4 of the passages that are about 11 questions each, 10 to 11 questions each. That gives you about 8.5 minutes per passage. So when you're looking at this, your pace is important. You want to pace yourself so that you're only spending about no more than 9 minutes per passage, so that you're not spending all your time on one particular passage. You want to make sure that you're pacing yourself properly. So numbers 1 through 11, you only want to spend about 8 to 9 minutes on that one, and the numbers 12 through 22, another passage, you only want to spend 8 to 9 minutes on that one. And then you remember it's 35 minutes, so that's and then 23 through 33 are another section, and then 33 through 44 on this particular practice test 3. And the tests will look very similar. You see a graphics test, and this one 34 through 44. So that's a 10 question one. So again, of the 11 question, you might want to spend a little bit more time, 9, but then the last 8 minutes. So 8 to 9 minutes is what we need to pace ourselves for, because it's 35 minutes, 44 questions, 4 passages. 4 passages. I'll write that out. So there's 4 passages. Count them, 4, and you want to spend 8 to 9 minutes on those, each of those passages, so that you're pacing yourself out properly as you go along. That's very important. It's very important, if you remember nothing else, pacing yourself, and so you're not skipping the last 15 to 20. Usually in the writing language, it's not as big a problem. Reading, the math section, it tends to be a little bit more of an issue. So think about it in terms of pacing. So on the next video, I'm actually going to go through a little bit more specifically the practice test questions and apply them to the types, so you see some examples.